He paid $5 for a hole in the ground that everyone said was cursed. Samuel Briggs stood at the edge of the crumbling stone well, watching the other ranchers shake their heads and walk away. They called him a fool for buying something that had been abandoned for 15 years. But Samuel had noticed what they refused to see. The wooden cover had been nailed shut from the outside, not to keep things from falling in, but to keep something from getting out. That night, alone on his new property, he heard it for the first time, a sound that froze his blood and made him question everything he thought he knew about this quiet territory. Screaming, rising up from somewhere deep below the earth. The purchase nobody understood. The auction had lasted less than 3 minutes. When the territorial land agent announced the old Whitmore property, including 20 acres and an abandoned well, the crowd fell silent. Not the respectful silence of interested buyers, but the uncomfortable quiet of people avoiding something unpleasant. Samuel Briggs raised his hand with $5 he had earned working cattle drives for the past 2 years. The auctioneer seemed relieved to have any bid at all. Sold to the young man in the brown coat. And just like that, Samuel owned land for the first time in his 26 years of life. Marcus Thornton, the wealthiest mine owner in 3 counties, watched the transaction with an expression Samuel couldn't quite read. His silver-headed cane tapped against the wooden platform as he studied the new property owner with calculating eyes. Most people avoided the Whitmore place, Mr. Briggs. There are reasons that land sat empty for so long. Samuel met the older man's gaze without flinching. Seems like most people avoid anything that requires courage, Mr. Thornton. I've never been most people. The exchange drew murmurs from the assembled crowd. Nobody spoke to Marcus Thornton that way. The mine owner controlled most of the employment in the territory, and crossing him meant crossing your own future. But Samuel had nothing to lose, which made him either brave or foolish depending on who was judging. That evening, Samuel walked his new property for the first time as its legal owner. The land itself was decent enough, with good grass and natural windbreaks formed by rocky outcroppings. The cabin needed work, but had solid bones. Everything seemed reasonable until he reached the well. The stone structure stood about 3 feet above ground level, built with craftsmanship that spoke of serious investment. This wasn't a simple hole dug by desperate settlers. Someone had constructed this well to last for generations. Iron rings were set into the stones for securing buckets, and the mortar between the rocks showed professional skill. But the wooden cover told a different story entirely. Heavy planks had been nailed down with more iron than necessary, creating a seal that seemed designed to withstand significant force from below. The wood had weathered 15 years of seasons, but the nails showed no rust. Someone had used expensive galvanized iron, the kind that cost 3 times more than regular nails. Samuel knelt beside the structure and pressed his ear against the wooden cover. For a long moment, he heard nothing but the evening wind. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of moving air. Not wind from above, but a current rising from somewhere deep underground. The well connected to something larger than a simple water source. His grandfather had worked in the Pennsylvania coal mines before heading west, and he had described the way deep tunnels created their own weather patterns. Air flowing up from below meant open space, possibly extensive caverns or abandoned mine shafts. Samuel made camp near the cabin that night, too excited to sleep inside the dusty structure. The stars spread across the sky like scattered diamonds, and for the first time since his parents died of fever 3 years ago, he felt something like hope. Then the screaming started. What waited in the darkness? The sound ripped through the night air around midnight, jolting Samuel from an uneasy sleep. His hand found his rifle before his eyes fully opened, instincts honed by years of dangerous work taking over before conscious thought could catch up. The screaming came from the direction of the well. Not animal sounds, though Samuel had heard mountain lions and wounded cattle make noises that could pass for human in the dark. This was different. This was words stretched and distorted by distance and stone, but definitely human speech calling out from somewhere below the earth. Samuel approached the well with his rifle raised, though he had no idea what he intended to shoot. The screaming had stopped, replaced by that same subtle current of air rising through the cracks in the wooden cover. He stood there until dawn, listening for any repetition of the sound, but the night remained silent. Morning brought clarity and determination. Samuel retrieved tools from his saddlebags and began carefully prying up the wooden cover. The nails resisted, their galvanized coating having bonded with the wood over 15 years. But eventually the planks came free, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the morning light. The smell hit him first. Not decay or stagnation, but mineral dampness mixed with something else. Lamp oil. Someone had been burning lamps down there, and recently enough that the scent lingered in the rising air. Samuel fashioned a torch from rags and kerosene, then lowered it into the well on a length of rope. The flame illuminated stone walls descending about 30 feet before opening into a larger space. The well had been built directly over the entrance to what appeared to be a natural cavern, modified and expanded by human hands. He could see wooden support beams and the glint of metal rails. This wasn't just a well. This was the hidden entrance to an abandoned mine. Or perhaps not so abandoned after all. The decision to descend came easier than it should have. Samuel had spent enough years living cautiously, working for other men, and accepting whatever scraps life offered. He had bought this land to build something of his own, and he would not be frightened away by mysteries that previous owners had been too cowardly to investigate. The rope ladder he constructed from spare materials held his weight as he descended into the darkness. His torch cast dancing shadows across walls that showed clear evidence of excavation. Pickaxe marks scarred the stone at regular intervals, and the floor below had been leveled and reinforced with wooden planking. At the bottom, Samuel found himself in a chamber roughly 40 feet across. 3 tunnel openings led away into darkness, their entrances framed with professional-grade timber supports. Mining equipment lay scattered about, covered in dust, but showing no signs of rust. Whoever had worked here had abandoned the site quickly, leaving valuable tools behind. Samuel chose the largest tunnel and began walking, his torch held high. The passage descended gradually, twisting through natural rock formations that had been widened to accommodate the passage of work carts. The rails he had glimpsed from above continued along the tunnel floor, their iron surfaces polished by years of use before being suddenly abandoned. He had walked perhaps 200 yards when he heard it again. The screaming, much closer now, echoing off the tunnel walls from somewhere ahead. But this time he could make out the words. "Help us. Please. Someone help us." Samuel broke into a run, caution abandoned in the face of obvious human suffering. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the first, and there he found what Marcus Thornton had been hiding for 15 years. The truth below the earth. 12 people huddled against the far wall of the chamber, their faces gaunt and pale in the torchlight. Men and women of various ages, their clothing reduced to rags, their bodies showing the effects of prolonged imprisonment. Chains connected their ankles to iron rings set into the stone floor, allowing movement within the chamber but preventing escape. Samuel's torch nearly fell from nerveless fingers as he comprehended the scene before him. These weren't miners who had gotten lost or trapped by collapse. These were prisoners held underground in conditions that defied everything he understood about human civilization. An older man with a thick gray beard spoke first, his voice hoarse from the screaming that had carried up through the well. "You heard us. God Almighty, someone finally heard us." Samuel approached slowly, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were showing him. "Who did this to you? How long have you been down here?" The answers came in fragments, multiple voices contributing pieces of a story that made Samuel's blood run cold. Marcus Thornton had discovered this natural cavern system years ago, before anyone else knew it existed. The caves contained rich silver deposits, enough to make a man wealthy beyond imagination. But mining required workers, and workers required wages. Thornton had found a darker solution. People who wouldn't be missed. Drifters passing through the territory, immigrants with no family connections, anyone who could disappear without raising questions. He brought them down here with promises of employment, then chained them to the walls and forced them to extract or at gunpoint. The original Whitmore family had discovered the truth accidentally and threatened to expose Thornton's operation. They disappeared the following week, and Thornton spread rumors that they had abandoned their worthless property. The well was sealed to prevent anyone else from stumbling upon his secret workforce. Some prisoners had been down here for over a decade. Others were more recent acquisitions, grabbed from distant towns where their absence wouldn't connect to this territory. They worked 12-hour shifts in the deeper tunnels, extracting silver that made Marcus Thornton one of the wealthiest men in 3 counties. Samuel listened with growing horror and fury. The man he had spoken to so casually at the auction, the respected business leader who employed half the territory, was running a slave operation beneath the earth. Every penny of his fortune was built on human suffering hidden from the sun. How many guards? Samuel asked, his mind already calculating possibilities. How many men does Thornton have down here? The gray-bearded man shook his head. For during the day's shift, 2 at night. They stay in the deeper chambers where the main deposits are located. They only come here twice a day to bring food and check the chains. That meant Samuel had time, but not much. The night guards would eventually make their rounds and discover the opened well cover. He needed to act before they could alert Thornton to the breach in security. The chains were secured with heavy padlocks, far too strong to break with the tools he carried. But the iron rings anchoring them to the stone floor were another matter. Years of moisture had weakened the mortar holding them in place, and with effort, several could be worked loose from the rock. Samuel spent the next 3 hours freeing as many prisoners as possible, working by torchlight while constantly listening for approaching footsteps. 8 people were able to escape their bonds, though 4 remained secured by rings too deeply embedded to remove without proper equipment. "We can't leave them," a young woman named Clara insisted. "Thornton will kill them once he knows the rest of us escaped." Samuel had already reached the same conclusion, which meant he couldn't simply flee with the freed prisoners and seek help from distant authorities. He had to end this tonight, before Thornton could eliminate witnesses and cover his crimes. Justice rising from the depths. The plan came together quickly, born from desperation and the cold logic of limited options. Samuel positioned the freed prisoners near the main entrance tunnel, armed with mining tools that could serve as weapons if necessary. Then he ventured deeper into the cave system, following the rails toward the chambers where Thornton's guards maintained their vigil. The deeper tunnels showed evidence of intensive excavation. Raw silver or glittered in the walls, exposed by years of forced labor. The wealth represented by these deposits was staggering, enough to build a city or fund an army. All of it extracted by people who would never see daylight if Thornton had his way. Samuel found the guards in a chamber fitted out with rough comforts. 2 men playing cards at a makeshift table, their rifles leaning against the wall within easy reach. They looked up with surprise when Samuel emerged from the tunnel, clearly not expecting any visitors from the direction of the sealed well. "Evening, gentlemen." Samuel kept his voice casual despite his racing heart. "Mr. Thornton sent me down to deliver a message." The guards exchanged confused glances. One reached for his rifle while the other stood slowly, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "Thornton doesn't send messages through the well entrance. That shaft's been sealed for years." "Was sealed," Samuel corrected, raising his own rifle in one smooth motion. "Now it's open, and so is your operation. You can surrender peacefully and take your chances with territorial law, or you can die in this hole, defending a man who would abandon you without a second thought." The standoff lasted only seconds, though it felt like hours. The guards were hired muscle, not dedicated believers in Thornton's cause. When faced with certain violence versus uncertain legal consequences, they made the practical choice. Weapons clattered to the stone floor as both men raised their hands. Samuel secured the guards with their own rope and began the process of freeing the remaining prisoners from the deeper work areas. By the time he finished, 23 people stood blinking in the torchlight, many of them seeing hope for the first time in years. The escape from the tunnels took most of the night. Some prisoners were too weak to climb the rope ladder on their own and had to be hauled up by those who had already reached the surface. Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills when the last person emerged from the well that had hidden such horror. Samuel sent riders to the territorial marshal in 3 different directions, ensuring that at least one message would get through even if Thornton tried to intercept them. Then he gathered the freed prisoners on his land and prepared for whatever response the morning would bring. It came faster than expected. Marcus Thornton arrived with a dozen armed men before noon. His face twisted with fury when he saw the opened well and the crowd of witnesses surrounding it. His silver-headed cane pointed at Samuel like an accusation. "You have no idea what you've done, boy. These are my workers under legal contract. You've committed theft and trespassing on private mining claims." Samuel stepped forward, positioning himself between Thornton and the freed prisoners. "Legal contracts don't involve chains and underground prisons, Mr. Thornton. And this is my land now, purchased legally at territorial auction. Everything beneath it belongs to me, including the evidence of your crimes." Thornton's men shifted uncertainly, their employer's confident authority crumbling in the face of 23 witnesses who could testify to exactly what happened in those tunnels. Several of them began backing away, unwilling to risk murder charges to protect a man whose secrets were already exposed. The territorial marshal arrived 3 hours later with a full posse of deputies. The testimonies took 2 days to collect, each prisoner adding details that built an overwhelming case against Marcus Thornton and his operation. Bank records revealed the sale of silver, or that could only have come from the hidden mine, providing documentary evidence to support the survivors' accounts. Thornton attempted to flee, but was captured at the territorial border, his fortune seized to provide compensation for his victims. The trial lasted less than a week, the outcome never in doubt, with so many witnesses describing identical horrors. Justice, delayed for 15 years, finally found its target. Samuel Briggs became something of a legend in the territory after that. The young man who bought a cursed well for $5 and uncovered a criminal empire that had hidden in plain sight. But Samuel himself rejected any suggestion of heroism. "I bought land because I wanted to build something," he told reporters from distant newspapers. "I investigated because I heard people crying for help. Anyone would have done the same." The silver deposits in the cave system proved as valuable as Thornton had always known. But instead of using forced labor to extract them, Samuel partnered with the territorial government to establish a proper mining operation with fair wages and safe conditions. Many of the freed prisoners chose to stay and work the same tunnels where they had suffered, this time earning money they could actually keep. The old well remained open, its stone walls now serving as a memorial to those who had endured so much in the darkness below. Samuel built his house overlooking the entrance, a reminder of how close he had come to ignoring the sounds that carried up from the earth. Clara, the young woman who had refused to abandon her fellow prisoners, became his wife the following spring. Together, they watched their land transform from a place of hidden suffering into a community where people worked and lived with dignity. Some nights, when the wind blew just right, Samuel still thought he could hear echoes rising from the well. But now they sounded less like screaming and more like voices finally at peace, their long nightmare ended by someone who refused to look away from uncomfortable truths. He had paid $5 for an abandoned well. What he found below had cost 15 years of human lives. But what he built afterward proved that even the darkest places can be reclaimed by those with courage enough to bring them light. That's the incredible story of how one man's $5 purchase exposed a hidden evil and brought justice to those who had lost all hope. If stories of courage and redemption in the Old West speak to you, click on another one of our amazing tales on screen now. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories from the frontier.